If you're kind of like an ambitious person, then kind of competing with others like is almost short-lived. A lot of the time you'll find, and I saw this a lot when I was younger too, that like you compete with others and then like you'll find yourself on top um, fairly quickly at times. And if you're just competing with like an average everyday person, you'll beat them very easily. If you work hard and you're um, kind of ambitious and dedicated to your work, and and then if you're competing against other like ambitious people, it might be a bit harder. But if you really are like persistent and you work smart, you work hard, and you stay with something for a long time, um, over months and years and stuff, you might find that you beat them too. Um, and it can be tough to be competitive at that point. And what I found is that if you're competing with other people, at some point you may beat them, and it's hard to keep going sometimes if you're only competing with other people and not competing with yourself, you know? And competing with yourself is an interesting thing because you can never really truly win. Like, technically speaking, like you'll always kind of be able to outdo yourself, and you'll always be able to be better than yourself than you were in the past. If you even have incremental improvements, you'll tend to end up beating yourself over the years. And an interesting thing, like interesting kind of thought experiment, is like if you try to compete with yourself, but of like future years, and definitely like if you're an ambitious person and a growth oriented person, like it's it's tricky because if you think about it, like if you're 23 now, you try to compete with 26-year-old you, or if you're 30 now and you try to compete with 35-year-old you or 40-year-old you, you'll tend to find that the older version of yourself will surpass the younger you, will be able to do things in a greater way, a grander way, a better way, larger way, a more refined or improved way, you know? Um, the older version of yourself will tend to do things better than the younger version of yourself, or just will be able to beat the younger version of yourself. Um, so, what do you have as the younger version of yourself over the older version of yourself? And I think what you have, perhaps, is kind of like being naive and being able to sort of take more risk and be more aggressive with things. But I think the big thing that you have is time. You know, the older version of yourself can be much smarter, can be um, more ambitious, can have um, done more things, accomplished more things, more wisdom, more experience, but they don't have the time that you have. They don't have perhaps the youth, perhaps the ability to take certain risks or try new things, try certain things. So when you're young or in your current present moment, you have all kinds of opportunities. And I think part of being a successful person and an ambitious person is, yes, working hard, working smart, and doing all those things. But part is like taking advantage of those opportunities that you have and kind of seeking out new ones, and taking advantage of opportunities that present themselves before you. And then from that, also learning how to kind of balance risk and reward, and do things that are not extreme high risk, and then learning how to fail well in doing things. So like learning how to do things, try things out, and fail in a way that's not extreme to where it's not going to kill you, it's not going to be horrible, but you can learn from it and gain feedback and like improve things, and really uh, gather like intelligence and metrics about like what works and what doesn't. Um, so I think that's one advantage that you have when you're younger versus older, and you can try things, experiment, learn things. You have the time, and kind of have the naivete. You know, you can try really quote unquote, like you can try really stupid things, and as long as they're not going to kill you, or they're not going to do like the absolute worst case things, like you're kind of okay. You know, you can try a lot of things, um, and kind of see what works and what doesn't. Um, but then the interesting thing though is that if you try to just compete on like raw skill or talent or ability, like the older version of yourself will tend to do better. Um, and it's something interesting too is if you've dated like a girl who's like older than you, they'll tend to say something like that like if I think if you have like friends that are older or like you, but like especially if you dated like a girl that's older and they've dated like older men too that like have a career or are successful and like other stuff, like you'll if you're attractive or you're like good at what you do and stuff, with most girls you date you tend to be maybe better than average or better than a lot of the other guys. But then if you try to compete with like an attractive guy who's older than you, um, they win. Like they tend to win over the younger you. And the girl was kind of telling me this, that like, oh, like guys, like they tend to peak out in their career, their looks, their status at like older age, in like their 30s or their mid 30s or 40s. And an older attractive guy can who has a lot of things together, has his career and everything else, can do a lot of things, can attract girls that are young, older, and of all like different age groups and stuff, and can typically like pretty consistently blow the younger guy out of the water. That's also why like if you see like companies and CEOs, why like the older folk will tend to beat the younger folk like out of the water. And why if you're younger it helps if you have like older partners or older people you're working with, because there's a lot of things you can't do, and there's some things that you can do. I think the older you get, the more you learn and realize certain skill sets, the more you realize what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you've hopefully gotten to experiment and try out a lot of things, and see what works and what doesn't, and you've gotten to fail well and like learn how to make mistakes in a way that you learn a ton of things from, but don't suffer so horribly that the rest of your life is ruined. An example that I'll always like kind of jokingly say, but I kind of agree with, for, at least for myself or other younger guys, is like, okay, my few things are like, okay, don't do things that are like so irreversibly like harmful or can be can hold you back, that like can really massively hold you back later. So like getting into massive debt would be one, going to jail would be one, um, getting someone pregnant that you don't want to get pregnant and having kids too early would potentially be one, getting married too early and then having that hold you back, um, or like having to get divorced or something like too early, like all of those things. Those are certain things that could potentially really hold you back. I think if you learn to fail well, that means like making mistakes, but that you can kind of turn back from and like kind of sort of change things and like still be okay, but like learn a ton of things from. Um, if you can do this, then you can kind of improve incrementally at first and then improve in kind of more revolutionary cycles and like in bigger ways over time, over months and years, and then you hopefully progress like as the person that you're becoming, and progress with your work and all the things you're creating too. And on some level you get to be much further ahead than where you were in the past, and in that way hopefully the younger version of yourself can far surpass um like prior versions of yourself, and hopefully the older version of yourself can indeed be further ahead than the younger version of yourself. What it takes, I think, is wanting to get better, wanting to improve, having a growth mindset that like what you know today is limited, but what you can know tomorrow can be much more. You can learn anything, you can get better at anything, and the only thing really stopping you is beginning and doing things consistently. There's a lot of things that you can learn, and there's a lot you can do to kind of learn and progress and grow. And then just beginning. And the more you improve, the more you kind of get better over time, the more you can kind of improve with yourself and who you become over time, and the things you learn, the things you produce and do. And in that way you can kind of be much further ahead and beat yourself out from the younger version of yourself. So if you're competing, I think in that sense it is most important to compete with younger and older versions of yourself and try to really outdo yourself. You know, if you compete with yourself, that's a hard person to compete with, but that's also a competition that can be done, you know? Um, if you're competing with other people, the only way you can really beat other people is if you're doing it by your own rules. And a lot of the time that means competing with yourself, but that also means playing the game to like your own strengths and not playing it to like the rules of someone else's. If you like, I've kind of heard this analogy that like, oh, like if you're like a lion and the other person's like a cheetah, you you can't beat the cheetah on just being fast. You can't beat them at their own game, but you can beat them using like the lion's strengths. You can be the best lion that you can be and beat the cheetah in that way and hope make the cheetah hope that like they're a lion and like kind of make it feel like it sucks that they're not a lion, but you can't become a cheetah and beat them at that. You know, you have to kind of beat them at your own game, and I think that's what competing with yourself is. It's like learning yourself, competing with yourself, your own strengths and weaknesses, and over time becoming the best version of yourself, utilizing your own kind of strengths, your abilities, your new things that you learned, and then your own like natural strengths and talents and abilities, and harnessing them and utilizing them to ultimately become kind of the best version of yourself that you can be. Hopefully that kind of gets better over time. So if you like this, please kind of let me know what you think, and subscribe for more ideas and topics like this. And feel free to like the video and let me know what you think. Is it important to compete with other people sometime, or a lot of the time, is it the best thing that you can do to compete with yourself and like with past versions of yourself and future versions of yourself?